Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Transgender Show. I'm your host, Emily. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome to the show a partner of a trans person. Love to get their perspective on the show. Adrienne Wehr is a multidisciplinary artist and storyteller and the cisgender wife of former guest Jessika Janene. Included among Adrienne's myriad story projects are In the Company of Ghosts, a multidisciplinary stage performance that she produced, co-created, and co-performed. The Bread, My Sweet, an award-winning indie film she produced and performed in. Dog Bytes, an award-winning web series she produced and performed. And she was also the associate producer for the Emmy award-winning children's TV show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Maybe you've heard of it. She's currently sharing tales from her new multimedia publication and podcast titled The Golden Boat. Everyone, welcome to the show, Adrienne.
Hey, Emily, and hello, everybody.
How long first have you and Jessika been together?
So we had a love at first sight experience on September 11th, 1998. And I was a non-believer in love at first sight until that happened. And I asked her to marry me within a month. And so our families would not be terrified. We waited a year to finally get married, but we have been married since 1999.
Wow.
Yeah, long time. We're long timers.
And how far into that did Jessika come out to you?
So Jessika came out in the depths of the pandemic. It was very late, 2020, and we both were actually separated by geography. I was taking care of my elderly mother in the state of Florida. She was taking care of my mother-in-law, her mother, who was here in the state of Pennsylvania. We were separated by thousands of miles. And the conditions of pandemic times, pandemic isolation, separation, our moms being sick, there was something there that really created the right habitat for Jessika to emerge. And she made her way down to me in Florida. She had gotten on the phone and said, I'd love to come down for the holidays. I thought we were just going to be reuniting because we had been apart for a few months, taking care of our moms. But she was actually coming down with the intention to let me know that she had had a sudden awakening of gender dysphoria, and late in life for her. I mean, she's younger than I am by a handful of years, but still fairly late to be having this awakening, especially with no prior indication to that moment. Yeah.
How did that discussion go for you? Like, what were some of the things that, what was the way that she brought that up to you?
So I was the first person that she revealed her truth to. And when I picked her up at the airport, I knew something was off. She was not herself. But I couldn't quite put a pulse on what this was. And so we ambled on for, I was going to say maybe a day and a half or so, until I finally just said, what's going on? What is happening with you? And we were actually walking on the beach when she kind of bumped and stumbled through this telling of this sort of awakening that she had had. And at that moment, she didn't even quite have the language to describe what it was. And so I was kind of confused. I didn't know exactly what it meant. And she wasn't sure if she was non-binary, if she was trans, if she was cross-dressing, what that was all about for her. And while I was shocked, caught off guard, not expecting this to be the thing that was underneath her presentation on the top, but this is what started coming out. And I met her with this overwhelming sense that was coming through me that, whatever this is or whatever it happened to be, she needed to explore it and find out what it was. And we had a few days together before she had to come back north. And, it wasn't easy for either one of us, because now I didn't have the language to express what I was feeling, because it was such a jumble of confusing feelings and questions and wonderings, and atop it, we had everything else that was going on. Everyone did at that time through the pandemic, but also taking care of our moms. And at one point, she had said, "I know the timing of this is horrible," and but we both kind of laughed at it. This is not something that you can control timing wise. We made a pledge to each other that wherever this journey was going to take us, we wanted to be extraordinarily honest with each other at the core. And so we entered this space with that pledge of honesty. And we also entered it, we were able to identify really quickly that there were actually 3 journeys here. There was going to be her journey, there was going to be my journey, and then the we journey, the journey of the relationship.
Yeah, that's amazing that you were able to do that. And I love that perspective going into the transition journey of not making any promises, just saying whatever happens, we're going to be as honest as possible with each other. And I think that's the biggest key to it, because you can't promise you're going to stay with somebody, because you can't promise that that you're still going to be attracted to them. There's a lot that goes into a relationship, and like I said, you can't make all these promises about that, except that I promise I will be honest with you the whole time. That's very beautiful.
Thank you. I mean, that was our truth, and it felt right. And I mean, we're a long-term couple. We have traversed many mountains. We have slipped into many valleys. We loved each other, which was that first night. The other thing that happened that night was that we both had the sense that we were going to be teachers for one another. We never could imagine how that would play out over time. And so when this occurrence took place, we had behind us the depth and breadth of all of our previous struggles and all of our previous periods of healing and triumphs. And so we had a grab bag of tools to pull from, but we didn't have any tools that were quite specifically tuned for this path.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to lay ourselves open to becoming as educated as possible, as resilient and flexible and fluid as possible, and to welcome in those wisdom tools that we had not acquired yet through this life, because we hadn't walked this path. We knew very few transgender people. We knew literally nothing about transition at the start of it all.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I find in the initial discussion that causes problems for partners is the worst case scenario. Your brain automatically goes to the worst case scenario of it. How did you avoid that when you started to approach what her transition was going to be?
Catastrophic thought is definitely a destroyer, and we both knew enough about that, but I'll speak from my perspective. It's not where I wanted to go, because that's being guided by fear, and that's being guided by confusion and things that haven't happened yet. And I have practices of mindfulness in my life and staying in the moment and allowing things to reveal themselves. And I really doubled down in those practices and just tried to root myself in that foundation to allow my feelings, my true feelings, to come up. And I wouldn't sugarcoat them or hold them back from Jessika, and equally to allow her feelings to arise. And fairly quickly on, it was pretty evident. I love what you were speaking about, when the egg cracks and the momentum starts to build, it just starts to flow. And Jessika was pacing miles ahead of me. I was consistently pacing behind. but because of that pledge we made at the court to be honest with each other, we talked about that. And so we also found out pretty quickly that we were not necessarily in alignment with each other all along this way. And we needed to find a way to deal with that misalignment. So again, trying not to get too far ahead down the road. Worst case scenario, the marriage is dissolving and exploding, and because the data is not great. Of course, we're exploring how many couples stay together when transition happens late in life, this type of thing. And we didn't want to be daunted by that. I didn't want to be swayed by that. I love to work in healing community with others. I like to find the people who are going through what I'm going through in the same moment, so I can speak a common language with them. But early on, I was struggling to find that community. I didn't have anything in place in person where I was living. So I was looking online, and I was finding a whole lot of negativity. And when it came to partners and parents, and I'm like, that's not for me. So that was another of my tools. I knew to stay out of those spaces. I didn't want to be around others who were speaking that kind of language of, this thing is being done to me. This wasn't being done to me. I had made a choice to take this journey with Jessika, but the transition was happening for her, and it was mandatory, and I wasn't going to stand in the way of that. So I had my own feelings I needed to tend to, and I'm also a great believer in therapy, and both Jessika and I had our own individual therapists that were helping us to navigate through these early waters. Both of us had spiritual advisors at our Access that we were consulting with, and would go on to, I eventually would find an amazing community here in the state of Pennsylvania that is all about parents and partners who are walking through transition. Or walking through transition with their beloved ones. So that would come later down the way. But you asked specifically, early on, how did I keep from going to that catastrophic place? I cried. I mean, I had to cry some of this stuff out. I had to shout some of this stuff out, not to Jessika, but to the moon, to the sun, to the ethers. And we, in the very early stages, we were curating very, very carefully who we were talking to about this. She had not come out at work yet, had not made a decision about who to come out to in her own family. And so I was taking her guide around when we could start actually talking to other beloved ones that were in our family and our sets of friends who might be able to be counsel for us through this. So for that first month and a half or so, we both were largely alone. That's where I was applying the tools that I had, and really was digging into research too. I was reading the people that I could find at that moment, and there were so few who had written from the partner's perspective. I had to kind of go back in history for a while. I found Helen Boyd, who that is the pen name for Gail Kramer, whose books, her first one was, and even the language that was being used at this time when she wrote her book is not what we would be using today. But her first book was My Husband, Betty, Love, Sex, and Life with a Crossdresser, and that came out in 2004. And I read that immediately. And then I read her second book, which came out in 2007, which is titled She's Not the Man I Married, My Life with a Transgender Husband. That was in 2007. And this couple is still together. And I already knew that. So I wanted to go back and find out about their origins, to find out what they did, and try to start building this tool bag that I knew I was going to need to carry with me along the way of this. So,
Well, and I
yes.
think it was so important that you did that from the perspective of, finding people who manage to stay together, trying to find the positivity in the process and how to do this successfully and stay together. I think again, so many people jump to the worst case scenario. They jump to the thought of like, this isn't the relationship I signed up for. I can't be in it. And I love that you said that you did everything you could to not let fear drive your reaction and drive your thoughts. You wanted to, fill that head with knowledge and understanding the best you could, and the most positive example. And I really appreciate that. I'm kind of curious though, if there were still things that you did fear or you were concerned about as she would, move through transition. Was there any of that?
Absolutely. And that is something that has changed along the way of it. The things that were perplexing to me in those first 6 months, I look back on that now and I'm like, whoa, got through that, and new things would arise. Now we had the unusual occurrence of having this built-in separation where we were thousands of miles away from each other during that first period, and that actually worked to our benefit. It gave both of us space and time to contend with and deal with the harder feelings that were coming up. I mean, for her, it was more euphoria. And the things that were making her so euphoric were oftentimes the things that were devastating for me. At that time, I was concerned about medical transition. I didn't know how far she was intending to go with that. And I don't think, well, I know that she did not know at that moment either. Before coming out at work and before coming out to family members, of course, being concerned and worried about how all of that would shake down. Of course, that other shift and change of how is this going to impact my sexual orientation and all those identifiers, and I really pretty quickly early on just started slashing all those boxes, and I'm like, I don't like the boxes anyhow. I'm somebody who is consistently tearing down identifiers that humans consistently create for ourselves, and it just gave me this kind of room and spaciousness and opportunity to not worry about that. And when we finally started telling people what was going on, I would get questions immediately like, are you a lesbian now? And is this going on? And I'm like, no, I this is my process. Let me evolve naturally, and it's going to be what it's going to be, and I don't have to identify myself to you or anybody else. The other harder things that I was dealing with at that time, this is a very visceral thing that I can speak to. And, this was back when the George Floyd protests were going on. And I didn't even want to utter this language out loud, but there were times when I couldn't breathe. I just couldn't catch my breath around the enormity of this shift and change. I'm an empath. I'm a natural empath. I feel profoundly to the core, and the feelings that I was absorbing from Jessika and my own feelings mixed together were just enormous. They were enormous. And they took my breath away sometimes, but I know how to get my breath back. And I did, and I would, and again, it was kind of a, Jessika's many paces ahead of me. I'm paces behind, but I catch up, right? I catch up, not necessarily to her pleasing, because I think she really would have loved that I was right there with her at the moment that she was discovering something that was, this was going to be next, and this was going to happen, and then this was going to happen. And I'm like, oh, I'm way back here. Just give me a little time.
I'm still getting used to the last thing. Hold on a second.
Let me catch my breath from that one. And then I'll be with you. Absolutely.
Were there any things that that Jess said or did through this process that really helped to make it easier for you to accept and to move through?
There was something at the very beginning that I really appreciated, and I would always go back to when I would get lost in the weeds. She and we're adventurers through life. We always have been. And emotional adventurers, physical adventurers, all of that. And we're open people. We like to stay open. We like to be surprised. We like to be curious. I really delight in the wonder of this existence. And so early on, she said, I think that this might be a really incredible adventuring type of journey, this journey of growth for us. And we might actually be able to have some fun through it. And I didn't know what that was going to look like or what that meant, but just that it piqued my curiosity. It helped my heart in that moment to realize that there were fundamental things about us as souls having this human experience that hadn't shifted or changed. The circumstances were changing. The kind of adventuring we would be doing was brand new for both of us, but we know how to do that kind of thing. And so I liked that. For me, it created a sense of solidarity, that we were in this together, and that we had the potential to, and the language I started using really early on, and I continue to use to this day, was that I recognized that this was going to be one of those heart, soul, mind expanding processes, that spaciousness was going to be found. The potential for me to evolve as a human being, and come into more of my soul essence through this experience, was very, very enticing and welcoming to me. And she and I could never have designed this for ourselves. It's like, we're going to program gender transition into our lives at this stage, and we're going to evolve as human beings because of it. It came, and this is what has become as a result. But early on, just that simple little phrase that she said helped me a lot. And to get to that place, to know that this was one of those incredible adventures we were placing ourselves upon. And again, I think I go back to the honesty piece because of that pledge, and we kept reinforcing that for one another. It helped me to have a sense of faith and trust. We had been through lots of life experiences where trust was fractured, and we knew what fractured trust does to the foundation of a marriage. But we had also healed from those fractures. So to know that that wasn't even part of this was really, really, really helpful. And it helped me to feel grounded and safe. There was a sense of safety.
Then the next piece, you've mentioned being several paces behind her as she was moving through her transition. What were some of the things that she did for you, or that you did together, to ensure that you felt like you had some control in the situation, that it wasn't all completely outside of your control, with her just leading and you being the tail?
Okay, well, here's one particular piece, and this was unexpected and highly creative. I mean, Jess and I are both artists, and so we love to tap into creative flow to resolve issues. And this came about, we were still separated, taking care of our moms, and she was starting to come out to, she had come out in the workplace, was coming out to family, and had the beautiful privilege of coming out to her mom a month before her mother passed away. What a blessing. And was starting to go out on the streets of Pittsburgh, her hometown, presenting as Jessika. Now, we've been in the city for a long, long time, and I wasn't here to be on the streets with her, but I knew very well that she was going to run into people, even though it's still pandemic times, people were starting to get out and about. And she was going to run into people that we knew. And I wanted to help support that experience so she wouldn't, I was conjecturing she's going to run into all kinds of, we don't know what kind of expressions people are going to have, or responses or reactions. So I want to let our people know, people who were my friends primarily, or friends of both of ours that I was in regular contact with. I started contacting them individually and sometimes in groups, to let people know what was going on in our lives. And for me, that helped me to feel that I had a sense of agency in this, that I was walking alongside of my spouse. We were both having different journeys, but again, going back to, we were also having the we journey. So this was a piece where I could contribute to the we journey of things. And it didn't matter that I was still paces behind on some of the specific things that she was experiencing with her transition. I could catch up quite a bit by contributing to this preemptive, way of letting our friends know. So when they would run into her on the street, they knew who she was. And, and it also just cracked open conversations that I was able to have from afar with others around, what I was feeling and experiencing and all of that at that time. So that gave me a sense of not being so alone with it as well.
I've heard lots of really bad stories of the reaction that partners get from members of their family and things like that. What were some of the pushback? What were some of the negative reactions that you personally faced in coming out on behalf of your spouse?
Thank you for asking that question, because wow, at some point I finally had to curate who I was talking to, because I just didn't have the energy to hold everybody else's reaction and concern and or anger. There was even anger. Not naming any names, I got after I had sent the kind of preemptive, hey, this is what's going on, and I got a call from an old friend, and I was being screamed at. And what was screaming at me was this, I'm so angry. I'm so angry. I'm so angry for you. And, in that moment, I wanted to say, no, it sounds like you're angry for you because I'm not angry. And Jessika and I wanted to hold space, and we did hold space for everybody to have their own experience with this. And we knew that anybody who knew us, whether it was family, friends, colleagues, whatever, was going to have their own individual experience. But as I said, sometimes the less than positive experiences became such a huge drag. And I had to protect myself from those. And they were often couched in this kind of backhanded way of saying, we're just really, really worried about you, Adrienne. And I love that, yes, friends and family are worried for me or concerned for me, because I am also affected by what's going on, certainly. But it didn't feel supportive. I have to say that. It just didn't. It felt like a very backhanded way of saying, we don't like what's going on, but we're worried for you. In respect to Jessica's family, there was a book. This was another book I kind of found fairly early on, called Love Lives Here, and by Rowan Jetty Knox, who at that time was actually presenting as female under his birth name, and has now transitioned. So, but it was about a transition that a family went through together, where the transition of their child inspired the transition of her of one of the spouses. It's hard to talk about of Rowan's spouse. And so there were two transitions going on at the same time, and it's an incredible story of how this family walked through this together. And since the publication of that, again, the author has also transitioned and is now a trans man. But I bought that book for all of our immediate family to read. That was primarily on Jessika's side. I don't have any siblings. There weren't people for me to have to give that to. But I gave it to them after I had read it, in effort to encourage that we move through this as a family together.
I haven't been able to get to this level in this conversation and talking about what partners face as far as the people in their circle. And I think it's just so fascinating to hear that, that they say, we're worried for you, we're worried about you, but in that way that they are not actually interested in hearing your perspective and how you feel about it.
I wasn't expecting that. And then when it started coming, and then coming sometimes way too much and way too frequently, again, I was realizing that it wasn't helpful. And I had so much on my plate. And Jessika's mother passed away, and my mother's getting sicker and sicker, and transition is going on, that I really had to shore things up and trust that the people who are struggling in that way would find their way out of it or not. But I couldn't hold them, and what was coming towards me was not helping me. Now, there were the opposite of that was going on too, where, just as you had illustrated, there were individuals who were surprised and didn't know what to think and or feel, and it was confusing, yet they were taking their cues from me. And I really appreciated that. And they were able to say things to me like, we see that you're okay with this, that there are challenges, there are struggles, but you're working through it. And I'm just aligning with you right now because you're okay. I'm okay. Jessika's okay. We're here for you. And then there were others who were so effusive, who just, it didn't, was not a second thought. And again, I also want to note that it's sort of a generational thing too. We're older individuals. I'm turning 63 this year. So, and this was all happening when I was the early days of transition. I was 59. Our generation is even liberal leaning people, liberal minded folk, didn't have experience that they could really ground this with. And so a lot of that bump and stumble came from people who are our contemporaries, who are our age or older. But the really cool thing is that so many of them have opened up to the journey of learning and the journey of evolving and the journey of actually having this experience, knowing somebody intimately who's going through transition, and their partner and their family, and understanding what that is all about. Because let's face it, what is most of the global society is lacking is education around what this true lived experience is. And if everyone were educated around it, we would not see the problems that we're having.
I'm curious, as you've moved along this and been part of Jessika's journey, were there any steps, were there any parts of this that you pushed back against or needed her to pause on for you to catch up?
Again, Jessika is a project builder. And when she's attached to a project, she goes full out and really hard and really fast. And medical transition was a swirl for me. And, FFS came first, well, HRT, then FFS, then all the rest. And everything was on the heels of the thing that came previous to it. There were certain times through the course of all the surgeries that I had to respectfully ask that she push back a bit because of what was going on with caregiving for my mother. Because I felt the responsibility of wanting and needing to be there for her and with her for every surgery. I didn't always have the ability to leave my mom with the plan of care that I had in place to be gone for a few weeks or a couple of months and not be there and be present for her. So I had to ask that Jessika slow down on a few of those things. And so we rescheduled a few things along the way because of that. There is a piece on the surgery spectrum that I still struggle with, which is vocal cord surgery. And I have asked her, of all the medical interventions, I have asked her to please try different ways of altering her voice before even considering doing that. And thankfully, she has agreed to do that. And she's been training and taking vocal lessons and all of the rest. That has been good. And all right, this is the hard one. I don't like talking about this because it makes me feel like my mother. Early on, when Jessika was really playing with self-expression and how she was going to dress herself, what kind of clothing, and I had to remember she didn't get to do this when I got to do this when I was a teenager. And so she would walk, in front of me, prepared to go out, and I would say that terrible thing that my mother had said to me, "You're not wearing that, are you?" You know? I don't want to admit to that, but I did that thing. And it was all under the guise of, I just want to help you. I want to help you, find your style. And then finally I had to learn how to just pull back. And if she wanted my opinion on what she was wearing, I would offer it. If she didn't, let it roll. So that was
That's amazing. That's very big. That was something, and that's something I talk about a lot with trans folks is, yeah, we're going through this second puberty. Many of us are going through it very late in life. And yet when all of those feelings come out and all of those desires to finally be yourself and to do all this stuff, yeah, the desire to do all those kind of teenager things, everything pink, everything rainbow, all of this stuff, just kind of comes out because we didn't get to do that. And being able to explore that and to get that out of your system, I feel is pretty important. And one of the ways I like to tell people to kind of encourage them to just go for it, is I don't think it matters. When you look back at this first year and a half, 2 years, you're going to cringe. Like there's going to be so much about it that is cringeworthy. The makeup, the style, all the stuff, your hair length, you're going to cringe regardless. So when you're in it, just go in it and have fun and get it out of your system so that then you're ready to go for it. Because it doesn't matter how buttoned down you try and be, you're still going to regret it later.
great guidance.
So a fun thing that I love to do when interviewing trans people about their stories is to backtrack and kind of find, once you had this new information, when you looked back, what were the signs that should have led you to this when you had that initial conversation with Jessika when she came down to Florida? You were blindsided and didn't see any of it coming. Now that you've had all of this information and this time, can you trace back some things that might have been indicators?
Yeah, Jessika and I talk a lot about this because now we have this lens to look backwards through and go, oh, wow, look at that. And so I'm going to go back to just something that comes directly from me. Jessika, when I first met her and we had that love at first sight moment, was so extraordinarily attractive to me, both outside and inside. But I want to speak about the outside. I've long been attracted to what I used to call girl guys. I don't really use that phraseology anymore, but those who present as male, who also had a certain feminine expression about themselves as well. And really early on in our relationship, and Jessika she was growing her hair out and it was really long at that time. She spent more time in front of the freaking mirror than I've ever spent in front of a mirror. And that was when she was still presenting as a male. So that was just a fun little moment. The sense that Jessika and I always had between one another, that we discovered that first night upon, we had been stealing glances across this crowded room of an art opening that night until finally a mutual friend introduced us and we were staring at each other face to face and talking for the first time. And there was this profound sense that we had been old souls together in another lifetime. We had finally found each other in this lifetime. And there was just a recognition of like, this is somebody that she said to me that night, she said, you get it. You get it. And to me, what that meant was that she saw me. She saw me. And I had never been told that by a male before. Who had told me those things but my female friends, right? Because we could see one another. We could really mirror one another for each other. And then, of course, there were other things that, we would dip into that's more on Jessica's side of when she was a kid and things like that, and stories that I was aware of from her family that we could look back on and go, oh, Jessika was always, strongly, keenly attracted to women her entire passageway during the years that she presented as male, and had lots of different relationships and yeah, a lot. And both she and I were able to look at that together, and I believed her when she said to me, she said, I feel like so many of those times I was wanting to be that female rather than to be with that particular female. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you define your sexuality differently now? And where I want to go before I get there is I'm just kind of curious, as you've moved through this journey and, as we get towards that conversation of your different definition of your own sexuality, has that been part of the awareness for you, that initial attraction of like, oh, I was attracted to a feminine energy to begin with?
Yes, to that attraction to that feminine energy. I believe all beings embody both sides. I have masculine energy coursing through me. I have feminine energy coursing through me. I think we all do in varying degrees. And but again, I never found myself attracted to the guy, and so. And yet I never also, I didn't identify, and I still don't identify as bisexual. Again, I kind of have released myself of the identifiers. But I love women. I mean, I have very, very close female friends. Uh, you know, I loved my exploration of feminist ideology when I was a much younger person, and it laid the foundation for the rest of my life to unfold. And I, I love feminine energy. I think it is this life-giving, life-lifting, creative, um, mothering energy that our world needs more of. And so when I sensed that, felt that, saw that within Jessika, it was extraordinarily attractive to me, right? Plus, she had physical attributes that were feminine, quite frankly. They were. And now she has, amplified those. There were periods of time, and I was doing this in that safe space, the Transforming Families group that I am a part of, uh, where we talk about these tougher buckets, like sexual orientation and how that shifts and changes for us, and grief, and the many aspects of that we experience through transition. And there was a time that I was trying on some of those labels and going, well, maybe I should say I'm pan, or maybe I should say I'm bi, and then I was just like, maybe I should just say I am. And that's where I have landed. So I am. And what it's done for me is it has allowed, I go back to that notion and practice of curiosity. So, as Jessika and I explore a new kind of intimacy together within our lives, emotional, sexual, all of the rest of that, I like to assume the seat of the curious wanderer, and what is new here, and how can I come at this with a mindset and a heart set of curiosity, and allow it to unfold naturally.
What has it been like for you to be brought into the trans community in a way? Do you feel like you've sort of been made part of this, and what has that experience been like for you?
Yes, it does feel that way. One of the things that Jessika and I did when I was finally able to move home for a while taking care of my mom, and we wanted to really tap into the trans community locally, and we weren't finding the inroads, right? And so what it took was Jessika actually, and because we're very immersed in the first few letters of the spectrum, LGB, and then we were stymied at the T. We're like, we don't know enough trans folk, and we want to know trans people. And she started getting to know trans people online. And I kind of was able to be welcomed in by proxy because of that. And here we are, right? So it's been so welcoming and so beautiful. And also, that would expand for me as well. Again, working with the parents and the partners of transgender individuals, then I was able to actually cultivate some local community as well. And, it's great to be able to speak the language together, to learn together, to grow together, to finally be in a position to give back, where I started this whole conversation tonight about not having the language to even speak about or give shape to what I was going through. I have language now, and I'm gathering new language as time goes on. And both Jessika and I are in a position right now to give back to other trans individuals and their partners and their family members. We have been part of different healing communities along the way of our life together, and we believe very firmly and strongly in the power of talking our personal truth with others so as to help people to feel less alone and to reflect what our reality was, and with the help that somebody else may glean something from us. And that's how we learn. You know, people who are ahead of us on the path have taught us, have been the wisdom bearers, the wisdom holders who have put the light on for us. And now we get to give it forward. We don't get to keep this for ourselves. I mean, yes, of course we do, but we get to amplify this by speaking our story to others and helping other, trans couples in particular. It's been interesting to watch the multi-generational thing too. Looking at people who are couples who are transitioning when they are in their 20s and 30s, very different experience than folks who are in their 50s and 60s, even though there are common themes that run throughout.
Are you able to provide a kind of a summary of when a trans person is getting ready to come out to their partner? What are some of the things that are most important for them to remember in approaching that conversation to in the actual coming out and beyond that?
Beautiful question. And I'm just going to let this stuff flow through me because I do have some things to say around this. Going back to the very beginning, the incredibly vital need for honesty at the core. And it starts with the individual who has awakened to their need to transition. I am so grateful that Jessika came to me near immediately upon the heels of discovering this truth within her. And that laid a foundation for us that we have been able to grow on top of this entire time. But as I've said throughout this evening, I have consistently paced behind. That's my lived experience. I don't know that everybody else will be pacing behind as a partner or as a parent. It has been, I have witnessed that over and over again as a common theme on this side of transition. So I would just say, be prepared for the misalignment of the pacing. And that doesn't mean that things are going to be catastrophic or that they're going to be over. And this is a very personal piece from our life together. Sometimes when there would be this kind of distance between, Jessika would try to interpret how I was feeling and think that it was going to be over or think that it was going one way when it was not. And I would have to, and to this day, I still have to say, you don't know what's going on inside of me. I can be as honest as I can with you. And she and I work in family counseling together where we have been able to really identify that she sees a lot of things in black and white. I see the big gray expanse in between. And so there is always room for growth and organic change to take place. Even if I can't say something clearly black and white in the moment, please don't misinterpret your partner or your friend or whoever it is as having made up their mind. We just need time sometime. There was just one time where I felt like Jessika was trying to shield me from really sharing her truth, that she really wanted to move forward on the surgeries. And I got a little bit of a delayed telling of the first surgery was coming, and she had already made up her mind to do the next one. So just let it be known, in real time is my guidance. I would have valued that in that moment. And I know initially when I was exhibiting signs of a natural grieving process that I was going through, that it was upsetting for her. And we hadn't contended with that when we were not under the same roof. So be prepared for the natural expression of things that may come through that, I know that it was wounding for her when I was grieving over things that she was very excited about. And it was upsetting for me too, that I couldn't meet and greet her at that level at that moment. But that's when we lean into trust and faith that if someone's pacing behind, they're going through their own natural process. And with hope, they're going to catch up. But I have great faith and trust. I'm just like, hold on to that faith and trust, Jess, because I know what I'm capable of doing. I've got hurdles within myself that are, some are biological, some are emotional, some are psychological. Let me traverse those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with agency.
I think that's something for partners to be mindful of in looking at this and dealing with this, that staying honest and checking in a lot and saying, being honest when you've had a reaction which was really strong, that in hindsight, now that you've had some time to think about, you don't feel that strongly about. Finding those ways to encourage that honesty if you haven't been great about it in your relationship. It sounds like you and Jessika had already developed and been through a lot of the rigor of developing that honesty through certain situations, and realizing how important it is above all of that, because like Leslie says here, you get into this pattern of trying to protect the relationship, trying to protect the spouse. But in the end, as she says here, I'll quote, in the end, it always comes out. But when it does, because it's later on, she's even more angry or hurt, because now there's this like hiding, not being fully honest aspect to it. I have rambled quite a bit on this, and I feel like there was a question before. Do you have any kind of follow-up comment on anything that I've shared just there?
Yes, and I think I want to wind it back a little bit and add a disclaimer to the suggestions and encouragements that I happen to be putting out there. Those are simply from our specific journey with this, and I strongly believe that everyone has to find their own, way of. There's not one way of walking through this, and a lot of it for Jessika and I was experimentation. And while we pledged that honesty at the core, there were times, and there continue to be times, when we both have harder feelings, and we're not the best person to work it out with. For me to take some of my harder feelings to her wasn't always the right way to handle it, and for her to bring some of them to me, if that makes any sense. Like especially when I found a community of other partners and parents, that was such a lifeline, to be able to go to other people who are having these same kind of harder feelings. And when you're serving in the role of advocate and spouse, or advocate and parent, you don't want to cause additional harm of any kind. Mm-hmm. And so Jessika wasn't always the best person for me to duke out some of my harder feelings with. And I was so grateful I had a community where I could do that with.
One of the things that you have to be mindful of is to not rely on the trans person in your life to educate you on all of the aspects of the trans experience. And the reason is, especially early on, asking some of these questions is for information for you, but it can come across, and it can feel like, to a person who isn't sure about things yet, that your identity is being questioned. Your validity in this new identity that you've adopted and understand yourself to be is in question. And again, like, you kind of feel like you have to answer correctly, because this is going to lay the foundation for how you're able to proceed. And you're not going to be able to contradict yourself and change later, because people are just going to throw up their hands and be like, "Hey, you're changing the script on me." So that's why I try to kind of caution people of like, yeah, it's really important for a lot of the education and for some of these questions to maybe consider taking them outside of the relationship and asking support groups, asking professionals, asking physicians, asking therapists, because of how those questions can hit a person who isn't confident in their identity yet.
Spot on. You really state that so beautifully well, and we have found that to be our lived truth along the way of this. But transition also has proven to be the golden opportunity for Jessika and I to go back into our long history together and clean up some stuff that wasn't completely cleaned up, some jagged edges that still needed to be smoothed over, and with this incredible wall that has melted inside of her, and the new wholly formed being who has come forth from transition, we've been able to go back together in a new way and work on old stuff, so as not to drag the old carcasses into the new house. And we also learned to not stay back there. It's like, go back there. We went back with the help of our therapists, individual and family therapists, cleaned up the mess, and then move forward.
Didn't dwell there. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been a gift of this entire journey. Yeah.
Wow. So I had a question that I was kind of hesitant to ask in the moment now because I wasn't sure how great it would be, but I'm kind of curious to see what you would answer to this. You needed time to mourn, and I think that's very, very common. And you were actually crying. What were you mourning in that moment? What were some of the key things about the relationship, about what you thought your life was going to be, I guess, that you were mourning in those moments?
So I am somebody who's never been, I don't have a portrait of what I want life to be or what I think it should look like. So it wasn't ever grief around that. It was early on. And again, the grief has changed over time, and have discovered that this is a common occurrence for parents and other partners who I am in community with, because they speak about it. And just when they think that they've gone through their grieving process in total, something else comes up that triggers another wave of it. But grief is wily in that way. And if I had to place a name around some of the earlier aspects of the grieving process for me, I just genuinely missed the person who was before. It's a very simple answer. And as more changes took place, like I remember coming home to Pittsburgh and had seen Jessika do makeup and pick out clothes and do kinds of things like that on video calls, but had never been in the house under the same roof watching her do it in front of my very eyes. And I walked by our bathroom. It used to be my bathroom, but now it's our bathroom. and she was doing her makeup. And it was the first time I had seen that up close and personal. And I burst into tears. And she was so she was concerned for me and upset that I was upset. But it was just there was a poignancy to it also. There's a bit of that, oh my God, this is the person who wanted to come out. This was this was who was behind that wall, and all this time couldn't come out. So there was that. There was also the layer of, but I missed that other person that was in front of the wall. And where did that person go? There was that. And I think also genuinely because we didn't know where this was going to lead. And so while I wasn't grieving the end of the potential end of the relationship, there was a grief attached around the unknowing, the uncertainty.
Crystal would like to hear how you look at dealing with balancing the desire of your spouse as far as medical transition with your own desire, and how do you pace those things out?
This is a piece that we are still dealing with in real time. There's the initial remarkable shift that happens during the surgery, and then there's healing after the surgery, and then there is the getting to know and become acquainted with the new body for her, and then it becomes like my turn to get to know this new body and what that means for me. Again, this is another place where Jessika and I have paced differently, and where I've had to say to her, it's not black and white for me. It may be for you, or you can imagine that if you were in my shoes, you would be making different choices and decisions. But I need to be allowed to organically heal from the shifts and changes and open to the new. And I'm in process with that still. And also because she is in new relationship with this brand new body and wants to know what it can do and how it can be and all of that. And she's in that brand new, beautiful, shiny place of this thing has come to be. And I'm right alongside of her, excited for her, and so delighted that she has been able to get there. And yet I'm still dealing with some of my harder feelings that are tucked around. Now, how do I meet that occasion, right? With equilibrium, with equal curiosity and desire to explore the new and be in the new and embrace the new in the same way, with abandon, as Jessika always says. Can't you just let go with abandon? And I love to do that. But I'm not ready to jump off with abandon fully, because I'm still finding that balance. I guess that's what I will say. I'm still finding that balance within me.
Adrienne Wehr, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this insight into this very deeply personal journey that you've been on.
Emily, it is my privilege and my honor to come and share aspects of the story with you. And I just want to celebrate what you are doing, because we've been talking about it all night too. Education is key. It is the piece. And we knew nothing. We know so much now, but that's because we're having this lived experience, and we did the work and we did the deep dive early on to gather the tools that we are carrying now with us. But the majority of folk out there, if it's not happening in their lives, they're not necessarily learning about it. And you really fill the void and fill that gap, and you bring education to so many. So thank you for your vital work and this vital mission.